The temptation has been there for all of us at some point in our teaching, venting about our students, setting things up in our classrooms to make sure we maximize our already present power. Today, I talk with Kevin Gannon about ways to respect our students in our teaching. Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential. Welcome to this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. This is the space where we explore the art and science of being more effective at facilitating learning. We also share ways to increase our personal productivity approaches so we can have more peace in our lives and be even more present for our students. I'm happy today to be welcoming to the program Kevin Gannon. He's a professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Grandview University in Iowa. And he describes himself as a total geek. And Kevin, if you wouldn't mind sharing, there are 3 ways in which you are a geek.
I am a geek for history, I'm a geek for teaching, and I'm a geek for technology, and probably some other things as well that... I geek regularly.
And you also talk about in your bio that you love thriving on experimentation and thumbing your nose at convention. What is a way in your teaching, just one way, the first random one that pops into your mind at which you thumb your nose at convention?
Well, my own personal appearance probably. I'm heavily tattooed and I dress professionally, shirt and tie in the classroom, but I don't look like what my students expect a college professor, at least in their mind, to look like. I tend to run a pretty free-flowing, give and take sort of classroom, and a lot of times I come in with a broad idea, but then improvise or allow the students to improvise as well. So I think giving up control in a lot of ways makes me a little bit more unconventional, perhaps.
When I go visit your website, which, by the way, to people listening, this is episode 52, so you can find the links to all of the things that Kevin and I talk about at teachinginhighered.com/52. And including there will be Kevin's bio, and you're holding some sort of creature in your bio. Can you tell us about that?
We had a traveling animal exhibit visit our campus. It was a wilderness preserve organization who go to college campuses in the Midwest and bring, exotic animals and sort of spread the word about conservancy with students. So it's a few biologists that bring them around. And I'm actually holding a very small alligator, which, he appeared to be pretty nonplussed by the whole situation. He'd been there before, but it was kind of cool. So if my face looks funny in the picture, it's because the gentleman right before he handed me this reptile said, "Oh, by the way, he might pee on you, and if he does, that's just brush it off." And that's right as you're about to get the hand off, that's not exactly what you want to hear. So if I look a little bit bemused in the photograph, that's why.
I love having that background. Of course, now I'm going to have to go back and look at it so I can experience the picture.
We're holding very still.
We don't want that pee on us, especially if you have to go on the rest of the day and you didn't bring a change of clothes with you in the car.
That was the thought running through my head, exactly.
Well, it's funny because the last couple interviews I've done, I haven't necessarily planned things this way. Sometimes we talk about failures in our teaching at the end of the episodes because that's just something we can learn so much from. I feel like we could learn more from our failures than we can our successes. At least I learn quicker, I hope, that way.
Yeah, but I agree.
I want to start out with your failures, and I feel like it's kind of a strange place to start, but
I do it a lot. I'm really good at it, so that's fine.
Tell me about a time when you have failed in terms of venting about your students and kind of how that changed things for you.
Well, when I first started teaching, I was teaching my own courses as a PhD student. I had a field in an area, Latin American history, where we had some faculty leave and demand for courses. So I was in the position where I got to offer some stuff on my own, maybe a little more quickly than I would have as a PhD student normally. And so I was teaching a course where, with Latin American history, a lot of college students in the United States come in with little to no background knowledge of the area whatsoever. It's just not taught in the high schools. And so I would get some, fairly interesting and creative interpretations of the material on the exams. And I kind of kept a running list of them, things I've learned teaching Latin American history to freshmen and, just all sorts of, the typical howlers in a history exam that you might get. And, but I would kind of post them. This was before Facebook really became big. So I actually kept a list in a notebook and I'd kind of post them on a bulletin board next to my mailbox, anonymously, of course. But, it was kind of fun for everybody to sort of look, oh my gosh, and kind of roll our eyes. And so I sort of kept doing that for several years. I would post on Facebook some of the ways in which students misanswered questions on exams, and from curious phrasing to just outright fabrications. And there's been some books that have been, there's one called Non-Campus Mentis, where a history professor has collected 20 years worth of student created history, and they're fairly amusing. But I realized that as one semester I was posting this stuff on Facebook, and I thought it was my way of venting, but it sort of hit me really weird. Why was I really doing that? And if a lot of my students had these howlers and errors of fact and all these things, didn't that really say something about me in the class? Did I really want to be broadcasting that hey, my results are like this? So it caused me to kind of take a step back and realize that while it may have been a way to vent and maybe go for some cheap laughs, that I was really kind of taking advantage of a situation that were I in the student's place, I don't think I would have been very happy about it. And it might have, I think it could have, in terms of my own student career, could have done a lot of damage for me and my willingness to take risks and challenge myself in class.
I've had a similar experience where I start to think, what does that say about me and my teaching? And then it kind of goes from being something that, I'm sure you got a lot of accolades and a lot of that, how funny you are, and it's sort of building up your ego that way. And then there's sort of when it comes back around and sort of hits you in the face, then there's the embarrassment almost of it that, oh gosh, that doesn't necessarily say a good thing about me or the students I teach or whatever that is, that what does that say about my results? So it's tough though, because some of it, let's be candid. I'm sure that still now we both see things that are absolutely hysterical. And so where do you go? Yeah. Where do you go now? What's your outlet? Or when you are just so disappointed and you think, gosh, I can't care more than you care or whatever, where do you go for your source of that venting? Because you do talk about in your post that it isn't that you don't vent anymore, it's that it's just somewhere else. Where do you think is the right place for us to express those both hysterical things you got to tell someone and then the things that are really agonizing as a teacher?
Well, I think it's really important, with any faculty situation, that you have your close friends, your support group, your colleagues, that when you're conversing, either on or off campus, that it's a safe space, because we do need that outlet, and we do need to, whether it's just vent about something or wrestle through some more challenging issues that we're facing either in our own career in the classrooms. There needs to be that space where we can, have some colleagues, have some friends that we trust, faculty, staff. And I'm fortunate to have a group like that where, we can sort of throw anything out there and it stays there, because we all understand that that's the space that maybe it's more appropriate in something like, oh my God, can you believe what these students did? You bring up the point about, the ego boost. Social media, when you put that up there on Facebook and you get all these likes and everybody's putting emoticons with smiley faces and it's kind of addictive. It builds you up. You say, well, I'm taking something crappy that happened in class and now I'm getting some laughs out of it and there's a silver lining. But again, that's, I've come to realize that's not the appropriate space. In fact, that's a very bad space to be putting that sort of stuff out there.
And to be clear, I also read in your blog that, by the way, I'll be posting all the blog posts that I'm referencing. I've really enjoyed Kevin's blog throughout. I guess I probably discovered it maybe 6 months ago, but I know you've been blogging for longer than that. It's absolutely a wonderful blog. So I posted the ones I drew from to invite him as our guest today. So the one I recall, you even specify it isn't like you don't put this stuff on Facebook anymore because your students are on Facebook, because you have decided for yourself not to friend students. So it's because I think some people, I shouldn't say I know some people say, well, it's okay for me to do it on Facebook because my students aren't on Facebook. Or the people I'm talking about aren't on Facebook. So it's okay to do it there. Why would you still say that's not okay, at least with you?
Well, I think for me, it's not so much that students might see it, but it's the effect that it has on me and my outlook, continually engaging in that. I mentioned in that same piece, when I was in graduate school, there was another PhD student teaching his own courses as well. And he would come into the grad lounge after being done and just unload. Oh, my students are awful. This is what they think. They're horrible. They're stupid. They can't write. I mean, just sort of, and we'd all sort of stare at him, just kind of stunned, like, man, you really hate these people. It got to the point where it was uncomfortable a couple times. And, if you go into the classroom with your weapons up like that, I just don't think you can be an effective teacher. I know I couldn't. I can't go in already expecting silliness or failure or them not to get it. And so if I'm regularly reinforcing that own opinion in my own opinion in the ways that I engage with social media and friends, then, the battle's already over. I've gone into the classroom. I'm not going to be able to accomplish what I want to accomplish.
Daniel Goleman in Social Intelligence, The New Science of Human Relationships, talks about that very thing, the contagious nature of our conversations and our dialogue. And it's almost, I don't want to oversimplify his work because it's groundbreaking, but it's the idea that I come and start venting to you, and then I've sort of left it's the Pigpen character in Charlie Brown, just kind of carrying this little cloud. Only it's if Pigpen left some of his dust behind, and like everybody started to have their own little cloud of the mess above them.
Yeah, it becomes a question, how much of this do you really want to carry around all the time? And I realized that, I was carrying a lot of this stuff without realizing it. And once you put it down, and that's a very intentional act, I think, to put that kind of stuff down and sort of reboot and reapproach things, it can be really freeing just for me as a teacher. My favorite quote is from Abraham Maslow, who says that if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. And I use tools as a metaphor a lot. I tell my students, I want to put tools in your toolbox so you can build what you need. So that quote really appeals to me. If I'm just going around carrying a big old hammer, what am I going to build? That's sort of the place that I got to in this process, sort of reflecting on, what was I really doing, and, this larger culture of, student shaming. And some of it gets pretty over the top, and it's a pretty negative space, and I can't stay in that space for very long.
Before we leave the subject of shaming and onto something more cheerful like failure, before we leave there, you do actually recommend that we do a little bit of shaming in a particular area. So while we shouldn't be shaming our students, who do you advocate that we should be doing a little more shaming of?
This actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately, so I'm glad that you asked that question. I think a lot of the student shaming that we do as faculty, when we're just sort of raging against how, kids these days don't learn and nobody reads. And, and yes, our students are pulled in a lot of different directions, maybe more than they have been in the past. I don't think they're necessarily, I'm a historian, so I've seen this, right? I don't think that faculty complaint about students is anything new. But, our students are working. They tend to be working more. The student body of today is much more diverse, both demographically, socioeconomically, than it was a generation ago. And certainly the pressures that we face as faculty with kind of the neoliberal attacks on higher education. I mean, look at what's going on in North Carolina and Louisiana, and especially Wisconsin. We are squeezed in a number of different ways. And sometimes it's easy because we feel enormous pressure. Faculty workload, I don't think, has ever been more difficult. And the circumstances in which we're asked to do it, especially for those of us who are contingent or non-tenure track faculty, i.e. the majority, there's so much pressure that we tend to take that out on students, I think, in a lot of ways without really thinking about it. When the real targets are, who are creating these conditions. Let's look at elected officials. Let's look at university administrators. Let's look at people with power and money who are making decisions that are creating a circumstance that really undermines the very ideal of higher education in a democratic society. Feeling squeezed as faculty like that, we may punch down instead of up because it's easier, but punching up, using the voice that we have and the intellectual resources we have to call attention to these things. And if we need to do so in a shaming sort of way, or snark on social media, or satire, or manifesto, I'm all in favor of that. And let's just make sure we aim it in the right direction.
One of the places that you are critical of is the trend that's starting, and it's one of the places where it's shown up is the Chronicle's website. and that is the Dear Student meme.
Mm-hmm.
And you point to Jesse Strommel's response that he had to that whole Dear Student. And this, the Dear Student, you young whippersnappers, I don't know how else to describe it, but he talks about that it's derisive. When we giggle as part of our work mode, because this is something that's read by tens of thousands of people, that we do need a safe place to vent like you talk about, but that's not the place to do it, is on a site like that. And one of the things that he talks about and you talk about is the fact that we have seemed to, in those cases, forgotten that we were once students. And I love your revised Dear Student post. So instead of Dear Students, you're really dumb and I'm really smart, your revised goes, Dear Student, you'll get better at this. So will we. Faculty, aka former students, and I just love your revision.
I mean, I feel really strongly about that, and Jesse's piece was a wonderful piece, and I think that Dear Student series was disappointing for Jesse and for myself and for others in that, the Chronicles Vitae section has some really great stuff. It publishes wonderful articles. They have some great writers. Kelly Baker is one of them. Lee Scourer, some great voices on there. And then this piece just sort of, it's a very jarring sort of discord. And again, it's a toxic sort of thing, I think, for us to engage in, given the pressures we face as faculty and given the current landscape in higher ed. If we start embracing this, we're taking our attention away from, I think, what's really important. Our students are our allies, not our adversaries in higher ed, and we need to be more mindful of that, I think.
If we are respecting our students in this way, showing them the high regard that we have for them and their potential, then we can sometimes build this fertile soil where we can begin to try to counteract some of what our students may have experienced in their lives of parental figures or teachers trying to steer them away from failure into helping them embrace it a little bit more. What are some ways in your teaching that you either try to help students or other faculty or yourself learn more about the discipline or about themselves through failure?
And I've tried a lot of different things. Some have worked well, some not so well. They failed, if you will. But one of the things that I think it can be as simple as sharing with students times that I've fallen short of what I've tried to do. I was an indifferent student at best my first 3 years of undergrad. And I made a ton of mistakes. And I made decisions and engaged in activities that were certainly not beneficial to my education. And it got to the point where, I had goals that I wanted to accomplish, and I was putting myself in a position where those goals would be impossible if I continued down that road. So I share with students, look, I did some of this stuff. I was in college. I get it. I'm not unaware of the range of choices that are out there. And what I'm very aware of is that not all of those choices are going to help get you where you want to go, even if they seem like the better choices at the time. I failed several classes in college, often in the same semester. I used to skip class all the time. My priorities were way out of whack. I almost dropped out. For them, I think, to see that someone who's gotten to the academic position I'm in come from that sort of story, I think can be helpful. And I tell them, don't do what I did. I mean, I did the experiments. I can give you the results. You don't need to run the same experiment yourself. And it just gives them some more information, and maybe it takes sort of abstract, sort of very kind of bland, do these sorts of things to be successful. And it makes that tangible, it makes it real, it makes it personal. We like stories. Stories resonate with us. And so I think my story resonates with some students. And I think even as well, letting students or faculty know that failure is okay, that it is part of learning. I think we know that in the abstract, but we don't always acknowledge it on kind of a real day-to-day level. And so I think it's empowering to be able to hear that, to be able to recognize that. And for someone who's an instructor to tell students, look, it's not always going to be unicorns and rainbows. It's not always going to be A's. There's hard stuff here, and you will, maybe experience setbacks or difficulties. That's all right. The question is, what are we going to do to get through to the other side?
What about a seemingly small failure of just a student getting a question wrong in a class? I don't know what size classes you typically teach.
Well, I teach, right now my class sizes are anywhere from 10 to 30. I teach at a small liberal arts school. In the past, I've taught lecture sections of 500 and just about everything in between. Mm-hmm. So I've got experience in multiple class sizes. My classes tend to be pretty discussion-based. And so, there are a lot of times where a student will have an answer to a question that I ask that is wrong, or at least not optimal, maybe we can put it that way, that they're getting there, but maybe aren't quite there yet. And I think sort of reframing that is, okay, that's one answer here, and then turning a question back. Okay, well, have you thought about this instead? And then throwing that open in the class, so a question, following an answer with another question, rather than saying, oh, no. You don't want to close off a conversation, I think. It's hard enough to get a good discussion going sometimes without closing it off if somebody throws an answer out there that doesn't quite work.
I've had students compliment me on that before, that it's a funny compliment. You do a really good job of telling someone they're wrong without making them feel stupid. Oh, that's good. But I do think it is one of those things where, because the other thing students really don't like is when they're not told that the answer is wrong, or the other person isn't told, because that doesn't help the person who said it or the other people who heard it too. And I think sometimes there's this sense of tentativeness that, oh, I don't want to insult them and this isn't going to go well, but turning it around to a question is really a smart approach.
No, I think there is an art to that, letting someone know they're wrong without telling them they're wrong, helping guide or move them in another direction, and then engaging the rest of the class and perhaps helping them do that too, make it a collaborative process. I think sometimes, people who tend to be very critical of students and, they don't know stuff and they should have the consequences of not studying because they never study, all that kind of thing. They look at an attitude like the one that I'm espousing and say, well, you're really you want this touchy-feely, new-agey classroom where anything goes and nobody's wrong and everybody gets a participation trophy and you all sit around and sing Kumbaya all period. And, that's not it at all. People are wrong. I'm wrong all the time, right? Mm-hmm. I don't see what the point is in not acknowledging that and not creating spaces where that can happen, but not derail what you're trying to do in the classroom. I think you can have academic rigor. In fact, I think you can have better academic rigor if you respect students as colleagues in a mutual scholarly enterprise. And I actually use that phrase a lot. We're engaged together in this life of the mind and the work that we're doing. I'm going to treat you like that, and I want you to treat each other and me like that. And then you can have some very good, rigorous, high-level analytical discussions and other classroom activities, because it comes from a place of trust where people know that it's okay to take risks and it's okay to maybe fall short.
What are some things that you do at the beginning of the class to try to set up that environment? And specifically, you have written some about your policy of not necessarily having a policy around technology in the classroom, but I'm sure you have other ways too.
I let them know that, I don't have a cell phone policy because I think it's important to be able to be decision literate, as I call it. You've got this powerful machine that can do all sorts of things. We're going to use it in class, in our work. You want to look something up or go online and pull down a document that we're talking about. We do a lot of source analysis in my class, for example. If you want to check Wikipedia for some larger context on a name or an event that we're talking about, great. But you have to be able to decide when it's appropriate to use this device and when it isn't. And you can only really learn that by experience. And so if I tell my students, put all your cell phones away and never use these devices, I'm creating an environment that they'll never experience when they get out of college. They'll be in meetings, they'll be in situations where they're going to have to decide, do I give in to the temptation to go on to Twitter, or do I focus in on the work at hand? And if I don't give them opportunities to practice that from first year brand new students all the way up through seniors, then they're not going to have developed those skills.
In what ways then do you attempt to guide them back when they have made what you would constitute the wrong decision and they are on Twitter and it's not part of the class or what have you?
Well, one of the things that I share with them, there is research out there that talks about how device usage or, if a student's on Facebook during a discussion, for example, the real damage comes from the distraction for the students around her or him. So when I share that research up front, the implication, and I make it very clear, is, if you've made the decision to do this, not only are you missing something, but you're also stealing everybody else's attention around you. You're stealing their time. That, I think, builds some accountability where students haven't really thought about it before. And when they see this research that shows the real distraction that occurs around a student who's using a device or surfing on Twitter or whatever, that all of a sudden sort of reframes the consequences into, well, I've upset Dr. Gannon, to, okay, I'm kind of screwing my classmates here. And I think that can be a powerful way to reframe the conversation.
Will you say something to them and confront them if it's still happening?
I do. I try to do it, again, a lot of the times we're in discussion or I do team-based learning in one of my classes. So a lot of, they're with their teams doing work, and I'll if I see someone on the cell phone and I go over and I say, what you checking on? Or, what you looking up? If they're not checking on or looking up something, they tend to just kind of put it away and very sheepishly. And usually I only have to do that once. And I do it casually, and I do it so it doesn't draw attention while everybody else is engaged in work. And then I build in other things. If I'm doing group work, I have groups assess themselves. Each member of a group assesses their teammates as well as their own contributions to the group. And then I average those, they give a point value to it. They grade themselves and their team. I average those, and those are actually class points that are part of their grade. So there are a number of ways I've built these expectations into the course that it incentivizes them to be collaborative, to be focused, and to be on task. Now, not every student is, always going to be doing the right thing on their technology. Have I stopped, texting back and forth? No. But have we ever stopped every student from, staring out the window or staring off into space or, doing other homework in class? If you try to shoot for 100% of that all the time, it's just unrealistic. But I think I've been able to create an environment where students are clear what the expectations are, and it doesn't take much to nudge them back towards it.
I still remember so vividly in elementary school, it was all about passing notes. And of course, we even would have mailboxes on our own desks, that people could pass notes.
Yeah.
And then there were these,
like me, check yes, check no, yeah.
And then there were these things that, I wish I could. They're actually called different things in different regions of the country, and I even forgot what any of the names are. But you fold up the piece of paper, and then it's like little triangles that you move back and forth with your index finger and your pointer finger, and so that you could figure out, who you were going to marry or how many kids you were going to have, and all that stuff.
Right. I remember those vividly. And I was a military brat, so we moved around a lot, and in every elementary school I went to, and I went to like 5, those things were there.
Yeah, and then there was this, we called them slam books out here in California, but then you'd fill out this whole diary of all your answers to different questions, and you were always number 7 throughout the entire book, and then someone else was number 8 throughout the entire book, and then you'd have your little book of all the information. So it's not like time wasting didn't exist before the internet.
Exactly.
I think probably there's some better time wasters. In fact, I have to just mention this real quick. I do an aerobics class, and there's a really fun song that's called Shut Up and Dance. And they did a mashup of all these dance scenes from everything from The Sound of Music to Footloose to, what was the other big, oh my goodness. I'm losing my 80s movies references on the top of my tongue. But I'm going to put that in the show notes just in case someone needs a little bit of an upper. The internet has been depressing to me this last week, so I needed that. So fun. But lots of ways we could waste our time before technology.
Well, we all know the internet was created for cat pictures and everything else is secondary. So.
Absolutely. So anything else we should talk about before we go to recommendations as it relates to creating this culture of respect for our students?
Well, the one thing I would mention is, again, some of the pushback I get when I talk about this is, I'll have people tell me, well, you just don't understand, we need to have control in the classroom. We need to teach them all this content. And if they don't learn it here, they'll never learn it. And if they don't learn about it in my class, they're going to go through life being ignorant about whatever subject it is. And then Western civilization will collapse. It'll be anarchy, dogs and cats living together, and it's easy to get carried away with that. As you mentioned before, there's a power dynamic, and it is about control, and it's very scary to give up control. And the way we're trained in graduate school is, pursue an argument relentlessly, defend it against all comers, and keep control over it, right? And so now we're supposed to go collaborate with other people as academics, and, what could go wrong? So, I think it's very much a part of our academic culture. And what I'm really arguing for is a collaborative attitude where, students are colleagues, maybe not equal colleagues. They're not at a mastery level like we are, but they are on the same journey that we are. They have the same goals that we do to make this a good, successful class. The key is to make sure that we all talk about a good, successful class meaning the same sort of thing. And they need to be on board for that. So, I'm not advocating, your lecture class should be a commune and, we'll have a love-in, but what it should be is a space to create, a space to learn, a space to innovate. And if you go in armed for combat, that's what you're going to get. So I think it requires a lot of reflection on our part and some unlearning of some habits that maybe we didn't realize that we had learned to be able to get at that and to success, to be successful, reflective practitioners.
And there are some ways to have even more influence than when we only rely on our ability to influence through power. When we can influence
Absolutely.
through other ways, it's incredible because as you described earlier, then I'm not the police, I'm not the law enforcement in a classroom. That's not my role. That's a really hard role to play at a college level. Then,
Right.
I imagine it's hard to play at any time my kids are young. And so at preschool, it's also very hard if that's your only method of influencing preschoolers is through law enforcement. But if
I didn't go to grad school to be cell phone cop.
Yeah.
I didn't go to grad school to be the tone police or the behavior police. And, if you complain about students who are acting immature in the sense that they're not acting as adults, autonomous intellectual folks, but you treat them like they are immature and expect them to be immature, well, you've created, I think, the conditions for, you have shown them, it's not what you say, it's what you do. So you've shown them what you expect them to be. So if you have a draconian policy where it's, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, they know what you think of them, or at least they have a pretty clear indication of that, and they're going to act accordingly, I think. What are we conveying? What kind of environment, what kind of space are we creating with our students, not just by policies, but by actions? Again, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail, well, I think students are pretty attuned to that as well.
Mm-hmm. We're going to move on to the recommendation segment, and mine is to go check out your blog. I don't do this often, but it's so good, and I really don't want people to miss it. So if you go to teachinginhighered.com/52, I have a link to Kevin's blog in the recommendations segment, and then also a couple of articles that might be a good place to get started if you like this topic of creating more respect for our students. And just thank you so much for all the writing that you're doing, and I love to see it spreading and getting a lot of traction on Twitter. That's been fun.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. The blog has been a great space for me to work a lot of these ideas out and to get a lot of great feedback and conversation about it. So it's been really helpful for me as both a teacher and a writer. So I appreciate the shout out.
You're welcome. And what recommendations do you have for people listening?
Well, in terms of some of the reading that I've been doing in my faculty developer role lately, kind of foundational books here. And I'm a history professor. I'm a total dork, so of course I'm going to recommend books because I'm an absolute bibliophile. But one of the books that's had the most influence on my approach is by Mary Ellen Weimer, Weimer, called Learner-Centered Teaching. And it's a fantastic book. It's one of those books that when I read it the first time, it affirmed a lot of what I was doing and what I was thinking. It affirmed a lot of the directions I wanted to move in, and she just articulated it so well that I'm reading it and oh yeah, that's absolutely, oh man, she said that great, so it really resonated with me, and just it's a good mix of kind of theory and practice that I would certainly recommend, and then anything by Stephen Brookfield, who is a very, critically engaged and reflective scholar. He's been writing for 20 or 30 years in the area of teaching and learning. And he wrote a book with Stephen Preskill called Discussion as a Way of Teaching that has some really good concrete stuff to kind of create the type of environment where students are, collaborators and where it's safe to take risks and it's safe to critically think about assumptions and things that students have brought with them into the classroom. It's very important to create that environment. So Brookfield and Preskill's Discussion as a Way of Teaching, I think, is a really good text to help get started with that.
And back on episode 15, I was able to interview him about discussion as a way of teaching. And I couldn't believe, I was naive. I was young. I didn't know any better. It's amazing how much that he could get into 30 minutes of just the richness. To me, I had not realized the richness with which he could talk about discussion. It's just incredibly powerful. So if people haven't been listening to these episodes for that long, episode 15 is one of the ones I say go back and listen to. That one is an incredible episode.
Yeah, I saw that on your page, and I've got it bookmarked because his book, The Skillful Teacher, is also a really good sort of personal growth and development book that's really had a big influence on me, too. He's probably one of my favorite writers in teaching and learning. He's just got such a range of insights.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about him, and someone else had recommended him being on the show, and he was gracious and agreed, and it's been fun. The Skillful Teacher, I'm not sure if I'm remembering this right. It might be being rewritten right now. have to
Yeah, I
look that
think
up.
it is. I
Okay.
think he's working on a new edition of it.
Yeah, because I was going to have him back on the show when it comes out, and he already agreed to that. So that's the good news. We're
Awesome.
watching for that.
Well, then I'll tune in.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and this important idea of having more respect for our students. And what I love, Kevin, about what you said throughout today's episode is that it isn't something that we're done and we can just check the box and move on, but a continued discipline we need to be cultivating in ourselves. So thank you for challenging me and for everyone listening.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks again to Kevin for being a guest on this episode of Teaching in Higher Ed. As always, if you'd like to comment on the episode or start a dialogue with Kevin or myself, you can do so at teachinginhighered.com/52. If you'd like to subscribe to the weekly update where you'll automatically get one email, no more, every week with a combination of the show notes with all the links of the things we talked about, plus an article about teaching or productivity, you can do that at teachinginhighered.com/subscribe. And one of the ways you can help people discover the show is by whatever service you use to listen, by either rating the show or giving it a review. Their algorithms that just helps bring it more to the attention of other people who might have an interest in teaching in higher ed. Thanks in advance for considering doing that, and I will see you next time.